the big picture and small. Are there folks here who would say they're pretty much like see the forest for the trees kind of folks here? Does that feel, raise your hand if you think that you're one of those see the forest for the trees kind of people. Yeah, pretty similar, okay. The reason to think about this exercise of looking at both the parts and the wholes, and in this, the goal here of this little picture was to look at maybe K-12 and then different elements, and we could put all sorts of things for those 4 bubbles, right? Or there could be 10 bubbles. There's lots of parts depending on how you want to define the whole, right? So whatever your whole is, and then whatever those parts are in there. The reason we bring this up is because of focus. And when we start talking about common agenda, sometimes we don't pay attention to, we get so caught up in the conversation that we think we're talking about everything. And so, oops, no, that didn't quite work. So if we can say, all right, you know what, let's look at asking a question about what is the part, what is the subsystem that we're actually trying to focus in on, okay? So, quick story, I was part of the King County Racial Disproportionality Coalition, and in its early years, back in 01, 2, 3, we were trying to talk about disproportionality in foster care. And when we would have these conversations, we would say, this is for all children of color, this is an issue, everyone come and bring your issue. And there was this Asian woman who came, and she'd say, I don't really hear us talking a lot about this. And folks will say, well, it's not, they're not really disproportionately represented. She says, but we're talking about all children of color. And I personally believe that's because we're a culture of very nice people, and we don't want to exclude anybody. So when we say we're talking about children, we'll say all children, or when we're talking about children of color, we'll say all children of color. But you know what the conversation was about was African American kids predominantly, and Native American kids. That was that took like 3 years of polite conversation to finally say, you know what, we're going to circle something. We're going to circle the part. But you know what, once we finally got to a place where we could say, that we can agree that that is going to be the focus of this work. Like, things went so much more expediently into, all right, what's the data we wanted to, who do we need to talk to? So just being willing to have some conversations about what are our parts and do we want to focus on a particular part, okay? So that's one aspect of this, and you can be thinking about that if maybe that's a relevant conversation for some of the work you are doing. The other piece, and I thank my friend Tim Jasko Fisher for this, he does this work with the systems change work he does with court improvement work. He looks at systems as targets in a good way, putting whoever they care about in the middle, and then on the outside, whatever issue you're talking about, having sort of the core supports. And these would be the usual suspects that show up at all the meetings. Okay, if we're going to be talking about early learning in Pierce County, we know who's going to show up. If we're going to be talking about issues of homeless vets, we know who's going to show up, right? Because of the usual suspects. That would be this group here, and you kind of make your target saying, okay, I know who these folks are. So a systems thinking, a tool we could use to try to just expand this one out is asking, again, this is a flight of imagination a little bit, who else might be on that outside rim of the system, whose work influences this, parts of the system too, and who will be influenced by our work. So it's just another way, this is sort of a schematic or a visual to be thinking about who else is on the outside, because when we do that, what we can do is it forces us to pull our boundaries out a little bit further. And so then we start thinking these interesting questions about, well then, who hasn't been at the table lately? So many of us, I'm getting a lot of nods here, many of us have these moments in our heads that we think about this and we look around and go, you know, so-and-so should be here. What I'm saying here today is that I think we all need to give ourselves permission to ask that crazy question, even if it feels like we may not have time, because it matters. Because they're part of the system. And I think some of these larger collective conversations require a larger, more diverse part of the system. Okay.